Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Cyber Collaborative members and guests, we really thank you for attending today. We want to share the results of our work of our task force on best practices for cloud migration. So I'm Tom Skura. I'm the Vice President of Content and Programs for the Cybersecurity Collaborative. Today I'm joined, thankfully, by two great panelists. Tim Callahan is a Senior Vice President and Global CISO for Aflac. Tim is on our executive committee, oversees the work we're doing, provides guidance to the collaborative. We're glad to have him here today, and I'll let him say a few words about himself in a second. And also, I'm delighted to have Mitch Greenfield here today as the Director of Core Architecture, Enterprise Information Protection, EIP. Mitch is a great contributor to this particular task force and to its content and output. So we're delighted to have him here today to embellish some of the materials that we have here. Just a couple of administrative items. All questions, everyone's on mute. All questions will be in the chat box. We will address those at the end of the session. So let me turn it over and introduce Tim. Tim, I've known you for many years, and you've been a great contributor, not only to Aflac, but to the industry itself. So thank you for joining. Maybe you want to just say a couple words for us.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate, obviously, the opportunity to be a part of this. You know, the collaborative brings value in that it's, you know, all the products, all the collaboration that we do is from practitioners. You know, this isn't one of those organizations that we have, you know, researchers, we have, you know, auditors, advisors, consultants offering products. So what tends to happen is, you know, our solutions, our recommended paths tend to be very pragmatic, something that someone has implemented somewhere and been successful at it. And then you get the you know, the experience of a large number of people from a practitioner standpoint coming together, developing these things, really gives you some, you know, most of the products that we've seen, they come out and you're ready to implement because of that, rather than, you know, kind of having to filter it through, well, this may be textbook, the right way to do it, but can we really do it? So I think there's tremendous value in that. And, you know, today we're talking about the, you know, the cloud migration process. And again, this is from people that's done it, that's experienced it. So I really just think that's a very valuable tool. And I definitely want to thank the team today that you know, put this together. I've reviewed it. I think it's high quality, like all of the products, and certainly something that you can take away from. So thank you, Tom. Thank you to the team.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I'll move on to Mitch. Mitch, welcome again.
Hi, I'm Mitch Greenfield from Humana. I'm Director of Core Security Architecture. So at Humana, core security means identity, email, endpoint, and network, all of which overlap in the cloud. And the cloud has, you know, changed how we execute all of those items. And, you know, over the years, I've kind of seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of cloud. So working with this task force, hopefully learned some more good and was able to share some of the good, and hopefully the paper and today's presentation will sum up some of the good and the bad to help us all be more successful.
Thank you very much, Mitch. Your experience and input to the team was invaluable. So I think Tim summarized it very well. I mean, we are not a vendor sponsored organization by any stretch of the imagination. We're subscription service for leaders and their teams offering decision support and strategy validation through a peer-to-peer model. That is to say, we're not deriving our recommendations from vendors who may be selling things. We are basing them on the experience of members and their practical uses of these things. I have to say, we don't shy away from talking about technologies. Technology, as you know, is absolutely essential to running an effective security program. Let me give you an example about, how we deal with technologies in the context of collaboration and in the task force working groups. I'll give you an example. We're running a ransomware task force right now. And one of the controls that the members have found to be very, very effective is the use of EDR technologies. Now, they're not basing it on, what Symantec or some other organization is saying it makes it effective. They're basing the fact that some of these have actually stopped ransomware incidents, has identified them, quarantined them, and made them work. But the difference here is members they talk about the tools that they're using and whether or not they've been effective and whether or not it's easy to implement or not, or whether or not they've gotten good support. So when you're in these task force meetings and you're considering implementing a tool or improving the use of a tool, you get good guidance from other members. And that's something you're not going to get from vendors. And it's very unique to the organization. So you can see the benefits on the left. One of them is the daily morning security report. Every morning, if you're a CISO, you will be aware of key events and not be blindsided if you go into an executive meeting. And we're doing a lot for both the CISOs themselves and also for their teams to strengthen their leadership, soft skills, and knowledge of security and privacy domains. So we for those that are considering joining, we really value our organization and believe it will bring unique value to your organizations. So what we're going to talk about is a little bit about the migration task force itself and how that works. I'm going to talk through the migration implementation guide. Challenges you face, we have 10 guiding principles that we want to remind everyone of, and I'm going to put it in a certain context. What we've done at the Collaborative is developed a preparation and deployment model, a method for approaching cloud deployments that's logical and builds on previous stages. So we're going to talk about that. It's recently developed and we're enhancing it, and then the appendices. We have 2 supporting tools. We have an implementation workbook, and we have a member contributed cloud playbook, which we'll go through. We'll summarize with what did we learn from all of this, and we'll talk a little bit about new task force initiatives and handle your questions and answers at the end of the session. So I'm going to put the names of Cloudforce task members at the right, to which we see Aflac and Humana here today. But we have quite a different collaboration of both government and private organizations and in different industries. This is a cross-industry challenge. It isn't specific to an industry. And we try to derive on the experiences of anyone that has worked in the cloud environment. Members shared their successes, false starts, and challenges. I think Mitch talked about, the good and the bad, and anyone who's gone into this has experienced some setbacks and some successes. And the value of collaboration as much as from the deliverables. Mitch, I may have said it all here, but is there anything else you want to add to, the actual experience of being on a task force? What's that like, and how much value?
Yeah, I think the other thing I would add is just the learning from your peers. And I just want to reiterate that because I think that's so critical. And one of the things I've taken away is the fact that everyone's at a different stage of maturity and a different phase in a cloud migration or ransomware mitigation or whatever problem the task force is focused on. So, not that you're necessarily learning everything, but I think there's tidbits of learning that you pick up through the task force that, prevent a stumble. And you maybe can learn from other people's stumbles. So I think that's been the biggest value proposition for me. I know one of our other task force around asset management, which was the first one I participated in, just some of the things I hadn't thought about yet really shown through in that task force, and I think accelerated some of our internal initiatives.
Yeah, I think too, and that's another good example. You find some members have moved that program along further and are able to share, what they did, using the CMDB or whatever it might be. And this, in the same is this, you know, some have done multiple migrations, some are just in the beginning phases of M365, whatever it might be. So you do get different perspectives. You get the questions from those that are starting and the answers from those that have gone through it, and then all in between. So, and that's in a structured conversation. You know, we in these task forces, we have an agenda that spans over the course of 8 to 12 weeks. And when we talk about specific items each week, and we document the notes, we don't record the sessions, we keep it confidential. And all through this process, members contribute different things. Like we've got the playbook from, you know, a quick service restaurant, a large one for this particular task force. For other task force, we'll get contract language on protecting information or incident management processes. Some really unique ones on the ransomware side. So that all occurs during the task force meetings and as a part of those meetings. So thank you for those insights, Mitch. So I want to talk a little bit about the deliverable that we came up with here and its use. We basically talk about migration challenges, 10 guiding principles. I'm going to go into these. I am going to talk about the DARES-PSO preparation model. That's an acronym which we'll go over in a little bit. Additional member guidance, lessons learned, and some appendices that talk about certifications, support organizations, etc. So it's a pretty comprehensive document. This is a huge area, and I dare say we'll likely have another task force next time to even elaborate on more detail and expand the DARES model. But if you want to level set and have a way to approach, a logical way of approaching migration, this is a great implementation guide. And again, it's based on member contributions. So I want to talk a little bit about the migration challenges, and Mitch, maybe you can help me here, that the task force was always talking about. One is evaluating cloud service provider security. And the fact is, you know, you can't send Amazon a 220 question questionnaire and expect them to respond. You know, maybe organizations of your size and Tim's size might have a better chance of it, but a lot of them won't be able to. So that was a challenge that we talked about. And we talked about, you know, relying on some existing questionnaires. And we even came up with a critical list of security controls to help members along with references. Any thoughts on that one, Mitch, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is also being willing to become comfortable with industry standard certifications. So that was maybe a shift for a lot of organizations that are used to getting questions answered in their format, but being willing to accept like a SOC 2 Type 2 or other certifications, you know, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, that they understand those because they really want something that is repeatable and low cost effect at the end of the day. Answering something unique for Aflac and Humana and Yum and everyone else on the list, right? Expensive. Giving everyone a SOC 2 Type 2, been there, done that, and they can provide that. You know, I think what I would really think about here is being willing to accept that certification and then thinking about what you really need to know beyond that and trying to dwindle or whittle that list down to just those key things that fall outside of an existing certification, because that's how you find success with these CSPs.
Oh, I think you really nailed it on the head. In other words, you're going to get the basic information on SOC 2 Type 2, and you can look at it and look for the exceptions there, you know, because the auditor might point out something. The ones I've looked at, they were always accepting on not doing the scans on time or something. But actually look for those to make sure. And I think you'll get that. Another one is the Cloud Security Alliance. I think CSA has some preset questions as another example. ISO certification is good to have, but you may not get the detail that you would get in a SOC 2 report from my experience. But I think the key operative here is and I just, Mitch nailed it. Use what is provided in the industry. A SOC 2 Type 2 is independently audited by a CPA type firm. And then focus on the other things that you want to go in on, like how are you going to protect my information, or keys, et cetera, things like that. So that's really good guidance. The other area that we thought was challenging was call them hidden costs. But, I don't know if they're hidden or they catch you in the end. When we talk about the DARES-PSO model, we're trying to bring those out much sooner in the process, so you don't get the shock of holding out your wallet and shelling out $20 bills. But some of them we talk about, we're training consultant hours, to help migrate. The migration time, all of a sudden storage requirements are greater, especially for logs and that sort of things. And then the process of transferring data to the CSP. Those are the ones I think the team came up with. Mitch, you agree with those? Do you have anything else?
There's two that I really want to highlight in there, and that's the training and the kind of data egress or ingress charges. The training, thankfully my organization recognized that maybe even before I did, as being a key barrier and a key enabler to the cloud migration. So I'll pick on Microsoft for a moment. They've got a number of free trainings out there. Highly recommend giving people the time and the permission space to complete those. There's a lot of awesome paid trainings also, but understanding that if we really want to get value out of a cloud migration, we have to change the way we operate. And the only way to change the way we operate is to get new skills. So the training is critical. And then the other thing I would want to make sure people are thinking about is the data egress charges. So every cloud is kind of Hotel California. They'll let you get in, but when you want to leave, they're going to charge you. So when you think about that, you really want to make sure that you're planning a strategy. If it's a multi-cloud strategy, that takes that into account. You don't want to be egressing huge amounts of data between Azure and AWS, for example, with a data lake in one and maybe applications in another, without really understanding those cost components. So that's a really critical element of cloud costing.
I'm glad you highlighted that. We've always had to get new skill sets, IT skill sets, throughout the ages. Here it is a different set of skills. We do talk about certifications. We have a whole appendix in this guide about certifications offered by vendors or independent organizations. The team came up. Well worth looking at and getting staff up to date. So training is important. And you talk about the data transfers. Yeah, that without thinking about those, we could be facing some pretty big costs. And there may be ways to architect that. The last thing, it really kind of goes along with 1 and 2 a little bit, are false assumptions that are made that you're not going to have to change your on-premises environment, or your data is located in one place where it may not be in another. I think the changes to the on-premise environment, especially for access management, or maybe something that people didn't think about initially, and they probably should have tried to architect that a little earlier on. Is that a fair statement, Mitch?
Yeah, your cloud migration is going to kind of touch everything at the end of the day, as you kind of decouple applications and decouple your environment. And so definitely need to make sure you're thinking back about the changes to your on-premise environment. And one other thing that we thought about, especially around the location of data storage and the way applications work, we spent a long time as application developers and security professionals building 3-tiered architectures, right, that separate the application from a database layer. And we kind of spent a long time developing services, right? That's been the biggest craze. And you've kind of created what we refer to as a service hairball. So you had all these services that are interconnected deeply. When you start to move applications, you really need to start thinking about what that means for those services and kind of how those services will continue to operate, and what latency will mean as you move, part of it, how it will impact storage and everything like that. So that was another, one that was a steep learning curve, I think, because there's overall impacts to everything you do. And you may say application A is great to move because you can find value in it, but then when you look at all the microservices it's calling, that might not be as good of a candidate as initially projected.
To help solve that, do you think people should set up a test environment, just a sort of a sandbox in which they can begin to play with some of these things? I mean, obviously in terms of
Yeah.
public. Okay.
I think getting visibility in the application stack and network are great. That is sometimes challenging. I know we all probably, and I feel safe saying this for everyone, probably our level of documentation from our application teams is not as articulate as we all would hope at times. So they might not even know all of the dependencies that they have. So we spent a long time kind of fingerprinting applications to really understand how they operate in order to therefore produce better documentation and then make better assumptions about how that application could migrate.
Well, that's a really, really good point. Thank you for that advice and guidance on this. So what I'd like to do now is talk about 10 guiding principles. I'm sure some of you on here will say, well, that's kind of obvious. Some of them are. But like everything, it's, strategy is one thing. The execution of the strategy is another, as we all know from our experiences, and often more challenging. The 10 guiding principles you may abide by and agree by, but the question is management above you, those below you, and those to the right and left of you, do they agree with those that are responsible for making this successful? And this is where collaboration comes in. You can get help from your peers here and information to help make your case for why these guiding principles must be followed to be successful in a migration. So steep learning curve, there is one. It's going to take time and a methodological approach. So if someone says, I want this done in 6 months, we're going to really, gung ho and do it. I mean, you got to step back. If you have not had the experience, we talked about training and all the, the challenges of moving applications over. You really need to get an understanding about the timeframes. And again, through collaboration with some of your peers here, they'll tell you how long it took to implement one aspect of M365, if that's what you're doing, and the timeframes and things. And sometimes having some other members support you, it's like having the consultant come in, which you know the answer, but no one believed you, and the consultant's verifying, and finally they decide to move on. It's a little bit like that. Only the benefit is you got members in peer companies that are actually doing it. Define a use case and learn from it. If you're thinking about a mass migration to the cloud, or cloud first and cloud everything, and you're kind of throwing everything into the bucket, I think we've said it's going to be very, very challenging and difficult to go forward.
I want to add one more thing to that one,
sure.
Tom. So define a use case. That really also is start small and grow, right? That's another way to think about it. And that's really important because your first app that you move is going to be hard. It's going to be the hardest one you try to move, even if it's the least complex. So it goes back to item number one with the steep learning curve. So just try to start small, try to start with a single application, and really set those expectations that it's going to be slow and steady on that one.
I like that even better, the phraseology, start small and grow. Use case is one thing, but yes, I think that's a better way of saying it. The third thing is it's not an outsourcing decision. I mean, there are potential cost savings, but we know there are costs too. And we all know about the elasticity, expandability, things with cloud and SaaS applications being already developed. But it shouldn't be a decision to outsource your IT on the basis of some of the outsourcing decisions that were done last late century and really this one. That seems to be something that came out of the team. Yes, you can expect functional benefits and maybe some cost savings and define those. But again, don't look at it as from that standpoint. So if someone says, outsource it all to the cloud, I don't know. That's a tough challenge. I'm setting someone
right. And the other thing I want to add is, all the cloud providers, Amazon, AWS, GCP, even all the SaaS providers from ServiceNow to Workday to Salesforce, they really consider this a shared security model, which is so important to us. The cloud providers got some responsibility. The SaaS providers got some responsibility. We're not going to be patching things unless it's IaaS, but if it's SaaS, we're not patching things, but we're still responsible for application layer decisioning. And that's really important to message up to leadership so they understand that there's still security costs. There's still daily operational security costs of securing both SaaS and IaaS and cloud platforms. So really can't let that slip away.
That's a very good point. And along with that corollary, you still own privacy and security. I mean, you're moving your customers' information out to the cloud. Certainly, you have contracts with the CSPs, but that doesn't mean that they're responsible for that. You have to really, you still are responsible for that. So don't think it's just anyone who thinks, oh, privacy and security, we're spending so much money, let's move it to the cloud and it'll be their problem. I hope no one says that, but if someone is thinking that way, that's not going to work. The sticker price is not the final price. So maybe looking at, you have to be pricing this as you go along, I imagine. Leverage on-site access management software, audit logs might, again, that's if you're looking at moving those over to a SIM. There's certain additional costs that are going to be there. And I don't know, in your experience, Mitch, if the CSPs are upfront about potentially identifying those, or did you have to dig into them?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. And it's a little bit of both because we're also layering on other technologies and other costs that are outside of what the CSPs are providing. I'll pick on Salesforce for a minute. So Salesforce is very happy to charge you for everything you want. They're very much a by the SIP organization. And being upfront and understanding that. So for example, you want your audit logs exposed or exported rather, some CSPs will charge you for that. Or at least they'll charge you for the compute to do that. So really need to make sure that you've got your requirements defined up front. And this is where a security organization needs to make sure that they're part of the overall architecture of the cloud environment. So that way your costs are baked in to what the organization thinks it's spending.
That's a really, really good point. The other thing is address some of these risks up front, the security risks we know about, who has responsibility and control for them. And you can look at the different environments, and they're typically those like SaaS environments, it's a lot on the CSP, but not everything. I mean, you may want control over the keys to your data. That's a different story. And there are implementation and operational risks. The other thing is shadow IT and business units independently going off and deciding they're going to maybe go off and get a SaaS application and so forth without really doing the due diligence. It's got to be a nightmare for CISOs, I imagine, because there have to be certain standards, and we'll talk about the cloud playbook in a decentralized organization with several business units and how this company managed it through that playbook, setting certain requirements. You have to follow these, but they had to get all these business units to comply. But there's always a problem with shadow IT and asset management and all other security disciplines, I imagine, right? CSP guidance and tools. Some of these have good guidance and tools that might help you. You want to identify those in the evaluation and selection process. They may have a model that they use that helps them implement in their environment. Have you found that to be the case? It seems to be something some other members have felt, but in your experience, how good are they, Mitch, do you think?
Yeah, they're great. Amazon has a great architecture documentation and blog and resources. Microsoft's got similar. I think they offer some really sound advice. I think my thing would be take it with a grain of salt and understand that you're going to have to adapt it to your organization because your structure is not going to exactly mimic what they have. But in terms of probably being 80-20, there's probably 80 to 90% of every document you'll read from a cloud provider that is relevant to your environment.
Yeah, and that's big. So the ninth point, business process changes, you may have to do some adapting. I've seen organizations try to put in a GRC tool without defining requirements and fail in doing that because the businesses would not adapt. But in the cloud environment, it's not going to be, I mean, you probably have to change some of your practices, right? I mean, it's certainly if you're using a SaaS application, that, you know, it's not going to necessarily be totally modified to what you want to do, and you may have to change the way you're using it. And negotiate, trust, but verify. People saying write the qualifiers in the contract. Again, some of these contracts are standard. I don't know how much redline you can do. If you're a larger organization, you may have some more cloud impact, depending upon the deployment model. It might be different as well. But you know, we recommend making sure that you identify what you need to protect your data, and it gets put in the contract. And you decide, is it my responsibility or the CSP's responsibility? And, you know, specifically, you really have to define those things.
Yeah, and a lot of that is, you know, tightly reading those contracts and understanding, as I think I mentioned earlier, it's a shared security model.
Right.
Understand what you've signed up for and where those are. So, you know, we use the example of publishing IaaS. You're fully responsible for that, right? If you spin up a Windows server, you got to make sure that's secure. If you have a network security group and you open up ports on it, you're responsible. So, you know, definitely understanding where your lines of demarcation are critical.
I think that's another important point to say. You still have to worry about the security and the management of the security controls on that. Like in that environment, particularly, IaaS is a very good example. That again, you know, the vendor may have tools that you may want to leverage, but you're still responsible. It's not like they have you know, you got a data center located here. You're obviously using their data center, but you're still responsible for a lot of the. It could be patching and other things as well. So I want to take us into the DARES preparation model. It's actually definition, architectural, security, evaluation, selection, and then partnership, staging, and operation. I'll go through all these steps. So I want to make a point because, you know, these steps aren't, this is not just a waterfall approach. And I think Mitch and others have said, well, you know, you're in an agile environment. You don't want to stop and get formal sign off. But it is a logical progression of the way to begin to narrow down specifically what this environment is. You're going to have to start very broadly with some ideas, but at the end of the day, it's got to be operational and engineered. So it's really making some specific decisions. So I'm going to run through this. All this is in the guidance document. There are 9 requirements in the definition phase. This is the first phase. You know, why are you doing it? How are you going to describe it? What are your business objectives? What will be regarded with data sensitivity? Who are the users? Who are the systems administrators? Will there be third-party interfaces? What anticipated internal, external resources will be required? So you're getting a basic idea of what you're doing. The next phase is the architecture phase. So here we are. I mean, based upon some of the definition components, you will choose which service model, SaaS, IaaS, PaaS, or function as a service, what deployment model, public, private, hybrid, community, and you also do a high-level diagram. So here's a way to sort of sit down and cast what this is going to look like. Then you're going to move into the requirements phase, the security and other requirements, and there are 12 requirements here. I'm going to rattle them off quickly. I know we're running out of time, but there's user access, administrative access, service access, logging, availability, recovery, data protections, privacy and security compliance requirements, interoperability with security controls, additional security requirements, conversion and data transfer. We talked about that. Consulting expertise you might need from the outside, and as Mitch said, training. What are we going to need to do that? We're going to move into the evaluation selection of a cloud service provider. And again, there are 6 requirements. Won't rattle them all off, but you got to look at the support services, tools, costs, etc. Then those are the preparation stages. Now, The deployment stages are partnership, negotiate with them, partner with them. And there's several requirements for that. Cost reviews, security requirements, service level agreements, breach notification procedures, you have to have those contracts. And then how do you meet with them in a partnership way, partnership meetings? Moves on to the staging, which is four requirements: data transport, maybe a proof of concept, testing, migration, cutover, and then operations, including monitoring and performance reviews. And those are the deployment stages. And essentially, you're building on the knowledge that you've had previously. So when you're defining this thing, as you move along in the steps and begin to do more in evaluation of security controls, it will become clearer as to what you need to do to deploy. So what we have in the implementation guide is a description of all requirements within each stage. And then we also have a migration workbook, which we'll show you in a minute, that actually is just a way to record information about the activities and requirements that you've done during those stages. The migration document, we mentioned the appendices, key terms, relevant certifications. If you're talking about training, the team did a great job looking at all agnostic certifications, professional organizations, and then describing the tools and then providing a link to those tools. There were third-party organizations that members said were very useful to help them customize their solutions. Again, we don't endorse them from the collaborative, but we're not shy to talk about vendors and technologies, and members suggested some. And then there are documents that you can reference for creating your security controls checklist. But I have to come back, these are very useful. I come back to what Mitch said, rely a lot on what the major vendors can provide, and a SOC 2 Type 2 report is a very, very good method of doing that. So the cloud migration workbook has two pieces that it has: a DARES-PSO analysis table, and it also has a list of all these requirements in it as well. So I'm just going to share this a little bit so we can
While you're
yeah, go ahead, Mitch. Yeah.
I was going to say, while you're pulling that up, the other good thing this workbook affords is a way to record key decisions, because you're going to make a lot of decisions as part of a cloud migration, just like you would with any system implementation or migration. So this is a great way to have that record of when decisions were made and what basis they were made on, because I'll pretty much guarantee that the earth under which those decisions are made will change during the migration. And this will give you something to reference back and be able to say, these decisions were made because of these 3 or 4 criteria that maybe have since changed.
That's a very, very good point. And it set up as a way to record all those decisions in one place, according to this model. And as we go through other teams and members use this model, we'll enhance it. You can record the decisions here. There are also reference documents that you can put in. So in other words, if you have your own forms and things, you can link to these other documents. We have a few that we've added in here, just, like the critical securities requirements checklists when you're evaluating security controls, and the other document. And I'll just get that to, again, the SOC 2 report, what Mitch said was absolutely right. And I'll repeat it. Look at the SOC 2, and you can, these are like, team developed, but they're from standards. These are critical control areas and requirements. You can go through a SOC 2 report and you can see whether or not they have it. You can look at ISO, you can look at, SIG, CSA, and then provide your comments, and then to accept, yes, no, conditional. And then, you can put some other comments in here. So this is a good worksheet to look at the major things. What we often do is overlook the forest or the trees, if I'm saying that right. Get to the 80 or 90% in terms of what's important. And I think this checklist is extremely important to help do that. So as Mitch said, the workbook is a way to use the model, record decisions, use it as a link to other reference documents, and to do your security evaluations on critical security controls. The one other member offered thing I do want to get into is, hopefully you can see this playbook, is we always, let me just step back and say, member contributed content is as valuable in many ways, in some respects, more than what we come out of the task force. Although I have to say the task force stuff is derived from the task force, and I personally think it does offer a lot of value. But I'm finding the collaborative members are really willing to share information. Now we scrub it all. We don't do the attribution unless they want to, unless you want to do that, which we're happy to do. But in this case, this is an organization that has multiple businesses, all making independent cloud migration decisions. And what they've done is basically provided some guidance, and these are all links to the separate documents that they have. So what, with encryption at rest, is it required for different types of platforms? What, field level, is it required or optional? Disk level. And then they actually link to different control guidance and information. So in other words, if you're decentralized organizations, everyone is making their own decisions. You can use this as a template for working with those organizations to make sure that they're following your standards. Obviously, TLS 1.2, not 1.1, is an example that you want to use for solid encryption in flight. So that's another tool that we have supporting what you're doing. I'm going to go back to hopefully you can see this. Let me just come back to our model. There we go. Excuse me. Get back here. We talked about the cloud playbook. Okay, so I want to move on now to, let's see if I can get this. Lessons learned. Hopefully you can see this. Move on. Tools. So let's summarize, and then we're going to get to some questions soon that we have coming up. We have 4. So in terms of the lessons learned, and Mitch, obviously, you helped put these together. I think we learned it's never straightforward. Uploading data can take weeks. So, in terms of your timeframes, you need to provide adequate estimates of how long that will take. And members can consider copying data, external storage, and shipping it to the provider for upload in their experience. I think the first thing that it isn't straightforward. The model we put together will help take the mystery out of it and make it more of a logical progression so that you can get to where you want to go. But Mitch, you'd agree, not straightforward, right?
Yeah, definitely. Most good things in life are not as straightforward as they seem. So this is definitely one of them. The other thing I would add is another lessons learned. I don't know if this actually made it on the list, but I think it's an important one, so I'll throw it out there. Yeah. Is what the impact on your network and internet circuits are for a cloud migration. Not only for the migration, but for steady state operations. Once you have some of your applications in the cloud and some of your applications in a traditional data center, maybe you have an SD-WAN or a MPLS network, really think about the network impacts of the application locations is critical.
We didn't have that on there, but thank you. It is now part of the list.
It's recorded now. It's on there.
Yeah. Right now you said it. So if anyone has any questions, you're the guy. Getting a hard commitment across the organization is essential to put something concrete into production. And again, this comes back to picking a small implementation and then building from there. I think what you said beforehand. You may need to rework as you expand, with a sound architecture will keep you true to form. Well, there is some rework, right? You find as you go through this, you got to maybe change your model and mindset as you learn more. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, there's at least some rework. It's also due to the ever-changing maturity of the cloud. Been doing cloud stuff for 5 or 6 years now, and what we were doing 5 or 6 years ago is very different than what we're doing today. So as the cloud providers have become more mature, as organizational practices have become more mature, as things like Kubernetes have become more commonplace, what we're doing to secure the workloads has changed, which I don't really think is any different than how we operate today, right? As a security organization, securing Windows 7 was different than securing Windows 10. Securing an iPhone is different than securing Windows 10. So all the same lessons that we apply in securing anything else, I think, really do apply here too.
Good point. Thank you. We say even good vendors will prioritize larger customers. I guess that's it depends, right? They only have so much bandwidth, I think, to work on some things. Maybe I'll ask a tough question here. How do you get the ear of the cloud service provider to kind of work with you, especially some of your needs? I mean, obviously, Aflac and Humana are well-known large institutions, but if you're not quite as large, is there some other ways to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a little bit on the smaller side, you'll have a little bit of trouble getting Amazon or Microsoft or Google's attention at the same level, a Fortune 100 company would. But there's great partners out there. So, while you may not get the ear of Microsoft, you may get someone like a NovaCoast or some organization, Deloitte, PwC, organizations like that do plenty of work there. So I just understand kind of where you are maybe in the food chain, if you will, and pick a partner that's appropriate for that. I think will go a long way.
Well, that's a very good.
And the last thing I'll say, I think the other thing I'd say on that is I think smart customers get priority. So when you start asking good questions that show you understand what's going on, they want to work with you. When you want to push the envelope of what can be done, they want to work with you. So that's another way to think about it. It's not always the largest organizations that are willing to push that envelope. Sometimes it is your mid-size organization that is looking for that differentiator, that is really willing to push the envelope. For example, Humana can be very conservative at times.
Well, you make so in other words, if you're a novice in this and you're sort of mid-sized, maybe partner with those that have the experience that can ask the smart questions. If you've got the technical skills and expertise, then as you say, the smart questions, working with them will engage them more. I guess better off than sending them a 500 question questionnaire off the bat and said, I'll talk to you after you answer it. They won't listen to it. Migration and transformation will always take longer than planned. So I think if this is the first time around, hard and fast deadlines on an end date. I mean, I think it's always good to strive for that, but I think you have to recognize that as you go along, you're not going to have the answer for how much time it's going to take until you are sort of in the midst of this. Hard promise, commitment, end dates, and sticking to it, especially first time around, may be a little variable. Members said it's best to migrate legacy systems gradually, and if you're going with a cloud first policy, start with new applications and services. I think you bring up the problem with migrating existing applications, Mitch, especially in terms of how the services are used in the cloud and so forth. So if it's a new application, team members felt you might have a little easier time. Not saying it's easy, but you wouldn't meet with all the time.
I mean, and new applications definitely pose some easier, but also some harder things because there's maybe not as well-defined security models for something new. But definitely the thing, if you're defining cloud native Kubernetes based applications, your security policy is going to look very different than if it's an IaaS server that you move to a cloud provider.
Okay, good. And then the last, I'm going to have to move on, we're running out of time, is classify your data, know exactly what the sensitive data are and the protection requirements. So I'm going to move on to some of the new task force initiatives. With this one, we're going to continue enhancing this model with additional tools. And as member use it, it's like anything. When you use it, you enhance it, make it better. So we're going to do that. We are in the middle of the Raising Ransomware Prevention Detection Response Playbook, where we're really looking at, I mentioned all the different controls. What we're going to do is come up with something for a CISO to kind of evaluate his or her organization, develop a plan, and be able to communicate to the board and to members of his or her organization who have to implement things. But we're really digging into which controls are more effective than not, because you're going to get a whole bunch of guidance from vendors on theirs is the best. But I think members' experience here is really panning out. And then we're looking at supply chain. We've done a general supply third-party risk management task force. Now we're going to be delving into the instant response of third parties and fourth parties and how that affects you, because we're finding in the ransomware team that third parties are getting hit by ransomware, or they're affecting the supply chain and potentially affecting the security of their customers. With that, I just remind you, this is worth 1 CPE. If you want a copy of the presentation, if you're a member, we've got all this information. If you're not a member, please email us and we'll send you a copy of this and you can use this as evidence. We're going to put up the poll questions. We want to hear from you on, hopefully you got some value from this. I do appreciate Mitch and Tim for being here and their staffs for really helping out in this. So while we're doing that, maybe we'll look at some questions. I don't know, Mitch, if you can see them. I'm looking at them.
Yeah, I do have the questions up, and I kind of want to start with Monica.
Yeah.
So Monica asked the question, why do so many people trust the cloud? I wouldn't want confidential information stored on cloud. Well, the good news is your information's out there. Whether you want it or not, it's already, I pretty much will bet money that your confidential information is being stored on a cloud provider. So that begs the question why. And the question why is speed to value and business enablement. So as security professionals, I think our reaction has to be, how do we get everyone on the same page that needs to be done right and needs to be done securely? Long past are the days, I believe, where you could say, can't go to cloud. I think longer the days as security professionals saying you can't do this, period, have passed. I think it's really a yes, but conversation. And this is, where some of the techniques in this guide will, I think, really help support how you go to the cloud safely and securely. And that's where, making sure you have the right funding, the right operating model, understand that you need to make an investment in doing this. The investment is above whatever they plan to spend. So if they're saying, I'm going to buy Salesforce, that's great. But then you need to say, well, wait a minute, we may need to buy Shield. We may need to do some additional training. And, there's other things that we need to do beyond that initial cost. So, I just, the cloud's here and I don't think it's going anywhere, is my perspective. Tim, what do you think?
I would also add that if you take a large enterprise in the traditional data center model, it was very difficult to keep that updated anyway, between legacy apps, vulnerabilities on systems, outdated security no longer supported, outdated systems no longer supported, all the kind of baggage you get with owning a large data center. You don't have that in the cloud. So I could almost argue that it's easier to secure the cloud environment and keep it fresh and keep it updated than the legacy technology environment. So I don't think you're giving up control. I think you have to look at it differently. You start emphasizing securing the data over securing the infrastructure, I guess. And if you go in with that model, I do argue that it can be more secure at a cheaper price. So.
Okay, let me just, what about, do we hit the first question up there from Coffee? Let's see.
Yeah, so the first question we got from Coffee was concerning the selection of providers. What can we do if the senior management seems to be comfortable with just the certifications that the cloud providers can present? Now, wait a minute, that disappeared on me. Did it move to the answer column? Okay, yeah.
There you go.
Should we move ahead with the control process, such as hidden costs and other stuff? Yeah. So I think the the certifications are a great starting point. I think hopefully some of the lessons learned and the top 10 list here will help you shape the organization's thinking that that there's more to it, and really emphasizing the shared security model. I know I've personally worked with all three CSPs, worked with Amazon the longest, and Amazon's like very upfront that it's a shared security model and that they do certain things and you do certain things. So really making sure that your management understands that you're not outsourcing security. Maybe you're outsourcing physical security, like we don't have to have a guard at the data center anymore, but we still have to protect the data. Layer 7, right? Application layer security squarely in your camp. So I think really using that as a way to make management aware is key. Excellent.
Okay, there's another one. We're getting documentation at the end of the webinar, I guess. So a couple things about the alignment of the framework with CSA and CMMC. It is not directly based on that. It's what we as members, some of whom have used those frameworks, put together. But I think that what would be a good next step as we're doing this is to show where we align to these different things with CMMC and so forth, so that people are using these things, they can immediately reference this particular document. But that's where we are with this particular thing. It is useful. It's what we put together, and members have gone through it. And again, we're going to be expanding this model as we go along. And the question from Monica, where's the cloud being stored? Trying to understand that one.
I think if you kind of think about that, at least my understanding of it is there are cloud data centers, if you will. I mean, Amazon, for instance, Amazon Web Service, there are physical locations. It's just that it's a different support model, and if you kind of think about it that way, it's a shared platform model. I think it's helpful, but I mean there are places. It's just they're much more elastic than if you have your own data center.
That's a good point, Tim. I don't know if we got most of the questions answered here. I think we're pretty well set. Any other questions? So we got some thank yous from folks. Just let me know if we're getting the documentation at the end of the webinar. Yes, the documentation we provided, the presentation. For those in the collaborative, this has been recorded, so you can access the recording for all the great insights that Tim and Mitch have given you. I think that's about it.
Yeah, and be part of our future task forces, please. While cloud is new to a lot of people, there's some other topics like ransomware that you may have some great insights that you could add, or some of the third-party vendor risk. We'd love to have you participate with us.
Thank you. You said it. You took my thunder away, but I think you just added. So I want to thank Tim and Mitch for really being here today and setting up the importance of the collaborative and how we work together, and for the insights specifically in cloud. We know this is a very, very large topic and a very, very important topic, and one that's not going away. And we feel we've, as a team, have provided some good insights to folks in a model to put this into context that can be very useful to manage this process. We're going to expand that. We are going to make, have it refer to other documents. And, again, we'll be dealing with many, many more different subjects as well next term. And I have to say, the ransomware guidance that we're looking to provide you and talk about in December is going to be, I think, very, very useful from the perspective of members who have been attacked and have actually been able to address them. So with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. Please have a good afternoon, and we hope you will join. Please reach out to us. And for those members of the collaborative, we thank you so much for your time and attention to what we're doing. Take care, everyone.